So, about a month ago, a nearly 2 hour long interview between Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson and scholar, social critic Camille Paglia surfaced online. It is a in-depth video. The two intellectuals talk about things like postmodernism, feminism, the current state of North American universities, and more. I found it to be a stimulating exchange, and I was particularly intrigued by one segment, which occurs at about 37 to 41 minutes of the video. As soon as I listened to it for the first time, I thought, oh geez, this is going to get a lot of attention in the media, spiral out of control. And it certainly did. So within this segment, there is a quote by Jordan Peterson that goes like this: "I don't think men can control crazy women." People took that statement, removed it from its surrounding context, and created a variety of articles claiming such things like Jordan Peterson is sexist, Jordan Peterson wishes he could beat women without consequence, and isn't this all so terrible, and irrefutable proof of why Jordan Peterson is horrible. So I took issue with these articles because I felt they grossly mischaracterized what was actually being said. And because I am a student and sometimes teacher of human evolution, I felt like I had a good understanding of what he was saying, and I wanted to share my point of view on this idea that men cannot control crazy women from a point of view of evolution. So, of course, evolution is most simply change through time. And when we're speaking about biological evolution, that is the change in genetics through time. Genetic variation shapes traits that we show up with, but of course, cultural and social factors are going to mediate how these traits develop and how they are expressed. So, when Jordan Peterson says, "I don't think men can control crazy women," what is he actually saying? I'm going to break it down into two simple points that I think is what he's trying to say. Number one, males and females are different. And number two, a interaction between a male-male is fundamentally different than an interaction between a female and a male. So, males and females are different. Seems obvious, seems like an uncontroversial statement. That depends on who you are. There are people out there who are teaching in universities who plainly say that males and females are not biologically different. And to me, that is insane, because anyone who has observed or studied, whether casually or formally, examined men and women, were very different. And from an evolutionary perspective, it's very obvious because males and females have different avenues toward reproductive success. Females get pregnant, birth a child, and breastfeed a child in our species in order to pass their genes on directly to the next generation. Males, at minimum, must contribute sperm in order to get a female pregnant, and therefore he has passed his genes to the next generation. So there's a difference in what we call the minimum reproductive investment between the sexes. Reproduction is more costly for a female in terms of metabolic, energetic, and factors like time. It's higher risk. Females are much more likely to die during pregnancy and childbirth than a man is during the amount of time it takes him to ejaculate into a woman's body. And another point of this is that the maximum reproductive output between the sexes is also very different. So, for example, Genghis Khan has, I've heard estimates like 30 million living descendants today. I don't know if that's true, fact check it for yourself, but that's the number floating around. Has any female ever had 30 million offspring? No. Well, I guess descendants are different than offspring, but anyway, a female is limited in how many children she can directly create due to her own biology, her own body, because she bears that child and she must pay the costs associated. And I don't mean financial costs, so obviously in today's society that's relevant too, but often it's a burden shared between the sexes. But I mean the metabolic and energetic costs. Breastfeeding is very expensive. It takes a lot of extra calories. And in North America, for the average person, that doesn't really matter because you can just go to the convenience store and buy a bunch of calories with your pocket change. In human evolution, that was not the case. You would have to walk for distances, you would have to, pick berries, you would need to hunt or share food with people who had collected it. It was much more time consuming and dangerous and challenging. So, frequently women would have been running on fewer calories than we are today. But anyway, so point number one, males and females are different, and this is because we have different avenues for reproduction. So evolution has shaped the male brain and body and behavior differently from the brain, body, and behavior of the female. And it's not just that our bodies are different in that females, have a womb, can carry a child, and men don't, but our entire psychology and hormonal profiles are different. There's not parts of the brain that are like, oh, this is the reproduction, section of the brain that governs how a female engages in reproduction. The hormones and neurotransmitters help regulate human behavior, and these are very different between the sexes, and they're extremely sensitive to context, and they jointly influence psychology and physiology at the same time. So I take a big issue with this nature versus nurture kind of thinking because everything is both all the time. Anyway, part of this process of selection for traits that help females reproduce compared to selection for traits that help males reproduce, keeping in mind that we have different avenues toward reproductive success and different maximum reproductive output, this means that the sexes have evolved different patterns of psychological gifts. I like to call them gifts or strengths. Why not? So on average, males tend to be better than females at certain kinds of physical tasks. They have more physical strength, more skilled at certain kinds of visuospatial skills, navigational skills that are usually understood in the context of talents that would help for hunting type of behavior. And females, if we think about what a female needs to do to reproduce, like I was saying, get pregnant, birth the child, which is allegedly can be very challenging, and breastfeed the child, that context where there's a deep intimacy, bodily, emotionally, resource between the mother and the infant, or the mother and the fetus, it creates a big pressure on females to be able to meet the needs of their infants. And this is how we understand to be the main pressure shaping the female brain. So it's been widely shown that females tend to be better on average, if you look at a big population, than males at various types of social and emotional intelligence. So females are good at decoding facial expressions, at reading subtle signs of body language, and presumably these types of gifts helped a female communicate with her offspring and make sure that that fetus survives. And or baby after it's born. And when a baby is very young, in humans, it is completely dependent on its primary caregiver. And evolutionarily, that would have been the mother, because she would be breastfeeding the baby. It's not like today where you have formula, or if a woman can't breastfeed, there's other options. So this difference between the sexes in terms of females being slightly more interested and slightly more skilled at social or emotional or empathic types of abilities is well established. Males tend to be slightly more interested and skilled at various kinds of physics and visuospatial kinds of tasks. And Simon Baron-Cohen, as well as Crespi and Badcock, have written about this at length. And we can contrast these two different ways of relating to the world as mechanistic cognition or mentalistic cognition, or social cognition, or empathizing, it's been called in Baron-Cohen's line of thinking, and systemizing. So, females and males are different because we have different avenues to reproduce, and evolution will favor those that reproduce. That's how evolution occurs in part. And these different pressures on males and females to reproduce creates different psychological gifts and strengths between the sexes. And again, there's many men who are highly socially intelligent, and there's many women who are talented in various navigational, logical tasks. But I'm speaking about averages that come out when you study a large population. Okay, point number 2. Interactions between a male and another male are fundamentally different than an interaction between a female and a male. And why is this true? Or why might it be true? So, evolutionarily, a male can be understood as potentially being in competition with another male for access to women, because access to fertile women is the limiting force on male reproductive success. So anytime a male interacts with another male, there's the potential that that male could be thwarting his success, or perhaps the males could work together on various projects that might lend them both possible mates. And of course, it's pretty general to speak about a male-male interaction, because the males could be friends, they could be genetically related to each other, they could be strangers, they could be enemies, they could be from different parts of the world. But I'm just trying to speak in general terms. So when a male faces another male, there is a potential threat in that the males could potentially thwart one another if we're thinking about it in terms of reproduction. When a female interacts with a male, there is a different set of costs and benefits. The female could be at risk interacting with the male, and of course her bodily integrity is very important to her reproductive success. The male can perceive the interaction as a potential opportunity where there could be something to be gained. So if both parties cooperated, there could be reproductive output. But what is occurring is a potential opportunity, a potential threat, an overlap of potential conflict and cooperation between two individuals that on average we can expect to have a different set of strengths. And if when a male and male interact, they have a similar set of strengths. And we know that aggression in animals between male animals proceeds through an increasing intensity of aggressive displays. So in fish, you might have the fish swim around in a circle to show off to the other male how fast they are. They might turn to the side and puff their bodies up really big, and you get these increasing displays of intensity. And the same thing happens in humans, but it might be more subtle. But I don't know, if you ask a lot of women, it's not that subtle. Anyway, and when a female interacts with a male, we have different sets of strengths interacting with one another. We know that the female, on average, has this slight edge in social, emotional, and linguistic capabilities, and we know that the male is physically stronger, and potentially has some gifts in some logical problem solving or visuospatial skills, maybe even hearing and visual acuity. And then society, fairly logically has a taboo in general against violence by men against women, which makes sense and should be even more taboo. Of course, this still happens a lot. So in the areas where a male is relatively more gifted than a female, say, for example, a female strength, he is constrained by society in using those strengths to interact with a female if they're in conflict with one another. And if a female is in conflict with a male, she has access to a set of strengths, social, emotional skills, perhaps manipulation, as well as sexual intrigue, that are not constrained by societal taboos in the same way. Or if they are, they're not as well articulated. Because obviously, if a male and a female are fighting, they could both be saying all sorts of things, but as soon as the male engages in physical violence against the female, that is a very obvious and very unacceptable line to cross. So a female has, I would argue, a broader set of tactics that she is most likely slightly more skilled at than the male, that she can draw on in a conflict situation that can go on for some time and go to an increasing level of intensity that the male is not necessarily equipped to match. And this is in the video between Peterson and Paglia. Jordan Peterson is speaking about something in his personal life when he's talking about these conflicts, because there's a woman in his community that has been putting posters up comparing him to Hitler or calling him a Nazi or something like that. And that kind of tactic is obviously extremely damaging. It's extremely damaging to Peterson's reputation. And how does a man fight against that kind of tactic? You can defend yourself and say, "Oh, I'm not a Nazi." But we know females have strengths in being able to share a lot of social information quickly. Females often have better and more integrated and bigger social networks. So that kind of tactic is more highly developed in women. And, how does a man respond? It's challenging. So men and women are different from one another based on the different ways that we reproduce and the different ways that evolution has shaped our brains and bodies toward that goal. And this creates different strengths between the sexes, and it creates different dynamics when we compare a same-sex interaction or conflict to an opposite-sex conflict or interaction. And of course, the point should be made, when people say, Jordan Peterson wishes he could hit women. He doesn't say that, obviously. But he's specifically speaking about crazy women. And, that can be a rude way to speak about someone who's actually insane or mentally ill or struggling to be well. But setting that aside for a moment, he's not talking about, an average man controlling an average woman. He's speaking about, how does a man deal with a woman who is using extreme conflict tactics like reputation manipulation, public shaming, emotional manipulation. And what is interesting, and what I've spent quite a bit of time researching in my academic work, is that these gifts that I've spoken about in terms of females being slightly more skilled and interested in social and emotional talents, those are the very gifts that seem to be disrupted or too highly expressed or dysregulated in women, that contribute to mental illnesses that are more common in women. So women are more likely to have depression by a large degree than men, and women are more likely to show up with borderline personality disorder, even if you factor in differences in treatment-seeking behavior. You still see this bias. And evidence shows that people with mild depression have some talents in empathy and social skills, where people with mild depression are actually better at subtle social cues than people with no depression at all. Similarly, in a review I conducted, we found that at least half the studies exploring social skills in people with borderline found that people with borderline personality disorder actually were better at certain kinds of picking up on subtle nonverbal cues, at inferring what another person was like, and so on. So the gifts that show sex differences, that emerge from a difference between the sexes in terms of what they need to do to reproduce, the conflict that creates between the sexes, also translates into the different patterns of mental illnesses we see between men and women. So So I think this idea of so men can't control crazy women doesn't need to be interpreted in a way that is offensive or suggestive of violence, but it is speaking to the power that women have emotionally, socially, and sexually, the tendency of those powers to become dysfunctional in certain kinds of social, cultural, or kind of trauma context. Of course, borderline personality disorder is highly linked to traumatic childhood. And yeah, so I think when we, take in that information and first get this kind of like, he said men can't control crazy women, and I find that really offensive, that we could take a little pause and dig in a bit deeper. What is he actually saying? And I think this helps remind us of the power that the two different sexes have. And women with emotional, social, and sexual power have the ability to be very influential, have the ability to influence social systems and families and communities to a large degree. And that is a power that can absolutely be misused, just like male physical strength or male logical, rational thinking can absolutely be twisted and misused to injure other people. So to sum it up, I don't think Jordan Peterson wishes he could hit women without consequence. And I agree with him, if I'm interpreting his words correctly, that males and females are different, which makes sense in an evolutionary context. And that same-sex and opposite-sex interactions have fundamentally different sets of costs and benefits for the two parties involved. And that males and females have different tactics in a conflict situation, and female tactics are not constrained to the same degree because they're not as obvious as male conflict tactics. So let me know what you think about these ideas, and let's keep it civil and critical.